Okay. Hello, hello, Isaac.
Rabbi, good morning. So good to see you.
Good morning. I'm very excited to get through the section of 533 to 537 on swearing. We got through the theology of swearing in our last
Mhm.
discussion, and today we'll probably talk about the legalisms, and that we started having the conversation about the idea that Jesus was always in conversation with the contemporaneous Jewish people about number one, the negative attitude towards swears as pretty much universally accepted. Today we're going to go into like the details of the legalisms, as it's very clearly the New Testament wants us to discuss this, because this part of the Sermon on the Mount could have just said, "Do not swear at all," period. We could have stopped in 534 and deleted the end of 34, all of 35, all of 36, and all of 37. The fact that the New Testament and Matthew specifically have the second half of 534, 535, 536, 537 means, to me at least, that it wanted us to have a conversation about swears from a legalistic perspective. Maybe true, maybe not, but let's see how it goes.
Yeah, so was the book of James written prior to Matthew, or was James written after the book of Matthew?
This idea of yes, yes, no, no, which I assume why you're bringing up James, also
Hmm.
shows up in Corinthians, I believe. So it's
Oh,
not
okay.
only a James conversation. So
Okay.
not only that, what we're going to see in our conversation today, the yes, yes, no, no model also had other historical parallels. So whenever we see other historical parallels and not something that's specifically unique to Christianity and or learned out from Christianity, we should understand it as a historical contemporaneous reality that Jesus was either through supererogation saying, now we have to take this higher level elitist kind of legalism, or him advocating for a different form of the religion. Okay, let's see. So even though we did 534 half it, let's start at 534 again.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5, verse 34 onwards. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one head white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil.
I'm literally a bit overwhelmed when I see this about how much there is to discuss. So we'll do our best to be strategic and break off piece by piece, and then try to show there's definitely an overarching theme of parable taking place underneath the surface here. Again, as we already discussed the theology of swearing, which we said last session, namely, just to repeat, um, making it that you're almost like a prophet by swearing and predicting the future when you really have no ability to predict the future itself is a bad idea. And number two, by sticking God's name out there almost on your line
Mhm.
is also a negative attitude. Both Jesus wanted to obviate and to stop his followers from doing. Okay, so that's what we said yesterday. So let's get started with the idea of 34. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven or by the throne of God. So I figured the best, there's so many places to start. The place where I thought we'd start is most likely the verse that this is citing, which of course I don't have in front of me. But if you look at Isaiah 66:1, this is probably where this idea is coming from. So we'll have a couple biblical verses. I think we'll start there. So Isaiah 66:1. So says God, the heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that you build unto me? Where is the place of my resting? So we see like the three concepts, at least: heaven, throne; earth, footstool; house, Jerusalem. So this seems to be at least the theme existing, where we have that these concepts exist side by side. That being said, in the Mishnah, the first and second century, third century work of the rabbis in Shavuot 4:13. It says when you there's a whole long story about when and why and how you have to make swears. I figure for your benefit, we'll skip the nature of why someone is getting forced to make swears. We mentioned in our last session that Jewish people rabbinically just forced to make swears sometimes. That's just, that's life. So what happens if someone says, I'm asking you to make a swear by heaven and earth? So in other words, there's different ways that you can make a swear. You can make a swear by God's name, by the tetragrammaton. But if you make it by heaven and earth, the Mishnah at least says here that if you want to force someone to make that swear, then they are exempt. Namely, that's a lower level swear. Again, there's a whole long list of, are you exempt from bringing an offering if you're lying? Are you exempt from making it? Whatever the background is, it's very clear from Rabbinic Judaism that if someone asks you to swear by heaven and earth, that does not have the legalistic binding nature that a swear of the higher level, which is literally the next line. However, if someone asks you to swear by the tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God, or by Tzvakot, the God of hosts, one of the names of God, or by the merciful one, or by any of the other various names of God, nicknames of God, all of those you would be chayav. So what Rabbinic Judaism understands is that you would be obligated. What Rabbinic Judaism understands is that to use God's name is to have a binding nature. To not use God's name is to not have a binding nature.
And I think that probably sits well with some of the ancient prayers. They all start with "Blessed be the name of God," as in God as in the holy other, and His name is blessed. And so yeah, that I think it fits within that model.
Right. So and to this we could say Jesus is going one level past that, because he starts by don't swear at all. You could understand by don't swear at all is saying don't do the name of God swearing. And he says, let's imagine you want to do the lower level swearing, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, or is the footstool of Jerusalem, and all those. You can't do either. I thought it was interesting to note the parallel between the Essenes here. We talked about this.
Yeah, but then why would that even matter? Because we just discussed that, right? If a person makes a promise either by heaven or by earth, by anything apart from the name of God, then that oath is not binding.
Well,
right?
You're noting that they like in many of these verses, we noted by the divorce conversation, it's a hard read. There seems to be an internal contradiction by the section 531 and 532 about the last line. Whoever divorces a married woman commits adultery, when the opening line said is that only you can't divorce her on the grounds of unchastity. So over here, you're pointing out an internal contradiction as well, Isaac. On the one hand, it says don't swear. And then it says, by the way, don't do this lower level swear. And then it says, if you do swear, kind of this is maybe the way to do it. So I don't believe the New Testament or the Sermon on the Mount is intending to be contradictory, but I think it is tending to be nuanced. It's trying to say that there is a time and there's a place. So let's just go through the details. So for example, the Essenes, sometimes they parallel the Dead Sea Scrolls sect. They have very famously, Josephus said, that anyone who swears or feels a need to make an oath is already condemned. And this is, I thought you'd really like that line, because that's exactly what you said in our last session, that the very necessity to make an oath is saying that you might lie. And if you might lie, then you don't need to make an oath. So the Essenes and Isaac were on the same page in that situation. The Essenes absolutely were anti-oaths, because if you're going to lie, if you're not going to keep what you're supposed to do, then you're going to lie about oath anyways. That being said, even the Essenes were nuanced, because very, very famously, the Essenes, if you want to join their group, you had to make an oath and say, I'm ready to join your group. I'm going to keep all your rules. So that just shows, just like Jesus was nuanced, so too the Essenes were nuanced in saying that it's very nice that you don't have to make oaths ever. It's a bad idea. But in this one case, make an oath.
So let's make a distinction, right? When you say make an oath as in, if I told Rabbi, I'll meet you tomorrow, is that an oath or is that a promise?
So this is what we're discussing. There's a legalism to oath. If you look at Leviticus, specifically 5:1, that's where one of the sections on oaths is used. It says a person will sin and will hear the sound of an oath, and he is a witness, either he or saw or he knew. If he does not testify, he shall bear his iniquity. So most people understand that as when is a situation when you have to make an oath. It's very complicated to kind of understand what's saying. And that verse is the beginning of a lot of the rabbinic conversations. But the idea is that there, as we said yesterday, there's a neder, a promise, and an oath, that there's this higher level obligation. And at the end of the day, you're never supposed to lie, as you mentioned. But an oath, it seems, will have a legalistic point to it as well. And what's the difference? There's the idea that if you break an oath, you probably have to bring an offering in the temple. If you break an oath, you might get punished with physical lashes. There's actually, in a judicial situation where you have a theocracy kind of laying down the law, it's very possible that you'd be obligated. That being said, there are many, many different kinds of oaths that one could take. We're going to go and try to break down these three momentarily that are getting shot down, namely throne, the throne, the footstool, and Jerusalem. But what we see throughout rabbinic literature is that there's many different kinds of oaths you could take. So the most famous one, we would say that Gamliel, which we do see in the New Testament, Rabban Gamliel, and there's Rabban Gamliel, Rab Shimon his son, and Rabban Gamliel again. So it's a little confusing that the grandson is named after his grandfather. But he would say Hama'on Hazeh. By the temple abode, I swear. So there's a very, very famous story in the tractate Kritut on page 8a. It says that once a pair of doves cost 1 dinar in Jerusalem. And if they cost that much, then when people were forced to come and bring dove offerings in Jerusalem, they wouldn't be able to afford it. So people would come from the rural areas and they'd try to buy doves and it'd be so expensive. So he went and purposely changed one of the laws, saying that if you owe multiple dove offerings, then you only have, if you owe 5 dove offerings, you only have to bring 1 and that covers all of them. It's like if you have to go to school for 5 speeding tickets, if you have to go to school for 1 speeding ticket, go to school once, or you have to go to school for 5 speeding tickets, you go to school once. So what he did is he lowered the price of doves, and when he did that, he said a swear to do it. He goes, Hama'on Hazeh, by the temple abode. And what we see from that story is that he used the language of Hama'on Hazeh, that by the temple abode was the way he swore. Yeah, would you like to say something?
So isn't the act of circumcision, which every Jewish male goes through, isn't that an act of oath taking? As in,
well, I mean, again, yes. I mean, I wouldn't say it's not an oath, but usually an oath can't. There's an idea that the Jewish people made an oath at Mount Sinai. It shows up all throughout rabbinic.
It's not an idea, right? I mean,
but it's very complicated about how you can put an oath on the next generation. I wouldn't call a circumcision an oath as much as an entering into the covenant of the community.
Yeah. Okay. Now, isn't that a form of oath taking? As in, there's a covenant. I mean, covenant does mean,
though, if you can make an oath for your child, right? An oath might be something you have to keep. You know, when we see with Samson, that his the angel told the family that he's not allowed to have wine products, or he's not allowed to cut his hair, and therefore he became a special kind of Nazarite. But I would say that's the exception. It's very uncommon to say that my child is bound by what I am saying. And that's why even that Mount Sinai oath that we're all, like all Jews are bound to not eat pig or to pray or bring offerings or whatever was bound at Mount Sinai, it's hard to understand from a legalistic perspective how that is bequeathed from generation to generation. But there's many different kind of oaths. Let me give you a couple. There's one I thought that you would really enjoy, that there's actually a phrase in the Sifra, which is again one of rabbinic texts. It says, by your life and by my life and by the life of my head. And this is exactly the language that we see here. And do not swear by your head. So what I thought was very interesting is that what this actually means, if you just know that phrase, you're not going to know what it means. What it means by your head, it means by the life of your head. So yeah.
So I hear what you're saying. A covenant or an oath cannot be passed down from one generation to another. If that is true, then promises too cannot be passed down from one generation to another, right? The promises God made of the promises to Abraham.
But the promises God made to Abraham were the promises to Abraham and his children.
Okay. So you're saying because it was made to him and his children, so then it passes on from generation to generation.
I'm not saying it passes. I'm saying that promise is made contemporaneously to each generation if you believe in the biblical promises.
Okay. Thank you.
So what we see in this text from Sifra is that this phrase was also a common phrase by your life and the life of your head. It's also on the tractate Brachot 3a. And that specific phrase was used as a way of vow. So we'll give one last example from this, that we also have a phrase by the covenant. That was also a phrase that was used. So the end of the story through all of this is saying that there are different levels of vows, different legalistic perspectives about how to look at it. So that's one section. Going on we're going to go through each verse, but going through yes, yes, no, no, we actually do see in the Talmud that actually was a way to actually fulfill or to say, I'm going to carry out an oath. So specifically, Rabbah said, a very famous rabbi of the 3rd century said, if you repeat yes, yes, no, no, that is the way to say that you're going to keep an oath. And we have some others who give some parallels. So like we always say, Jesus is acting as a contemporaneous understander of rabbinic Judaism. and he's kind of addressing it and how he feels. So let's go through some of the finer points. So first it says, do not swear either by heaven, for is the throne of God. So I think the first question we have to ask on that verse is, what is the throne of God? Thank God we have in Kings 1, 22, 19. We actually have the we have the throne room actually described by Michayahu, and it says in Kings 1, 22, 19, Michayahu said, therefore listen to the word of God. I have seen God sitting upon his throne, which is the first reference to that, with all the hosts of heaven standing by him on his right and on his left. So most people understand hosts of heaven as being like the stars and sun and moon and all those things. And this idea of, if you want to think of it from a mystical perspective, there's like 7 heavens, and God kind of lives in outer space beyond the 7th heaven. So I think that would be like a pretty appropriate way to look at that. But the throne of God sometimes just used as, I think the word is paraphrasis, where it's used in place of God. Sometimes we'll say like the White House is something like the White House said means the president said, or or this comes to the temple, but that really just means the priest. So too, when it talks about the throne of God, that really a lot of times means by God. What's really interesting about what Jesus is saying here, it says, don't swear by heaven, don't swear by earth, and don't swear by Jerusalem. But then he actually gives an explanation of each one. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't note that when he says, don't swear at all, either by heaven, for is the throne of God. So here he's kind of giving a little bit about his theological or metaphysical understanding about what each one represents. So I just think we'll just like note it for our import, because heaven isn't necessarily the throne of God. And I think as a Christian, you're going to use the word heaven a little bit differently. I think heaven here means the farthest reaches of outer space. It means the things that are above us. It means where the physical world connects with the non-physical world, which is seemingly how they would have understood from a metaphysical and or theological perspective. So don't swear by heaven, the throne of God. That's like the one place. And then what is earth? Earth, as we saw in Isaiah 66:1, that you have the heaven is the place that God lives, and earth is God's footstool. It's like the last place that God influences from. If you think that God is living very far in outer space, he influences the stars the most, the moon the least, the atmosphere a little less, and the land the least. It's like the place as you have to transition from metaphysical to the physical world, you have almost like less of that divine grace or the divine inspiration or the divine output or impact. So this is why it's called a footstool. A lot of times the footstool is like the lowest thing on the ground, but still the kings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you have the last line, you have, or by Jerusalem, for is a city of the great king. I couldn't find any examples of when Jerusalem.
I meant to ask you this. So if you clarify, right? So earth, heaven, throne of God, footstool, that makes sense, right? I think we've already touched upon this, but Jerusalem, the city of the great king. Who's the great king out here, right? Like, who is this king? Is he referring to some person, or was he referring to somebody who is to come, or was he referring to himself, or how do the folks understand this word of the great king?
I don't know. I think you know the two options, right? One is the historical seat of the monarchy of Jerusalem, and the other one is he's referring to himself. There's no really more options.
Well, then if he says that this is, then okay, if you were to take the second thing that this is his city, then that does raise serious theological questions, right? By saying that this is, I'm the king and this is the city from where I reign.
Well, we
would
know
you
it
say
doesn't
that
refer,
that
we know it
raise
doesn't refer to
theological
Herod.
questions of?
It definitely doesn't refer to Herod's family, that's for sure. But what's interesting, again, like I'm not sure the theological question that you're being plagued with, but we do know he's not speaking from Jerusalem right now. So even if he's claiming kingship, even claiming messiahship, it's not specifically referring to him right now, because it is not the city of the great king if Jesus is the king right now. So I understood this as not like a Jesus reference, but that's why I brought that Gamaliel family, Shimon and Gamaliel idea that I swear by the temple. I couldn't find an example where someone swears by Jerusalem, but I thought that would be the equivalent. I swear by the holy city of Jerusalem. I swear by earth. I swear. These are like the three, and the theological idea here is that there's 3 pillars of which the world exists. And this is what I think is the side idea, the tangential idea that's coming out in the sermon. because I really feel that these are completely tangents. He didn't have to include any of this. So first you have heaven, God. The world exists with the God perspective. And then you have the human perspective. But then you have the place, the third pillar, the place where those two places meet. If it's when the temple is standing, the temple is a place, it's imagined as, Professor Sarna talks regularly about how the temple is actually set up as the footstool of God. So he actually has an article on that very famously, Professor Sarna. But over here, I don't think this is meant to be like the footstool the way Jesus is using. Jesus is using the footstool as earth itself. I think he's using Jerusalem as just the place where heaven and earth meet. It's the place where like the big things are happening. And again, like you could argue this is foreshadowing, his sacrifice and his death, or it might just be like the reality of the way that the Jewish people saw Jerusalem at this time period. That Jerusalem is where big things happen. It's the place where heaven and earth meet. It's the place where the conversations about the future and past and present of the Jewish people and about religion take place, which now is just a minefield of pain and suffering.
But that's a theological statement in and of itself, right? It's saying that this is a place where all these big things happen. But yeah,
it's so interesting to me because when I look at verse 34, if it just said don't swear at all, either by heaven or earth or by Jerusalem, I would have been happy. The fact that the New Testament, that Matthew feels that it wants to give an explanation of each one. Why don't swear by heaven? Because that's God's. Why don't swear by earth? Because that's also partly God's. And why not swear by Jerusalem? Because that's God's Messiah. So just like we spoke in our last session about how there's the idea that not only you can't swear by God's name, because only God owns God's name, and you can't kind of take any ownership of that God's name through swearing. What we're seeing here is that every aspect of the world is also owned by God. It's
what I'm surprised, what I'm surprised is I can see earth, I can see heaven, I can see earth because they are two different places. But then within the earth, he's carving out this place called Jerusalem, right? Because Jerusalem is part of the earth, or it's a city, it's a place within earth, right? Now he's saying,
you know how Jerusalem also has this metaphysical connotation. A lot of times when he speaks of Jerusalem, there's like two Jerusalems. Like there's like the Jerusalem on the hill, and there's Jerusalem, the physical manifestation.
So in this case, right, so it sounds like he's referring to the city as in the metaphysical manifestation, or is it the physical place? Is he referring to the physical place of Jerusalem, or the metaphysical manifestation of this place?
I don't mean to cop out by not answering, but I think what he's doing is he's trying to make this idea of swearing and pop a parable into it. They don't swear. And why shouldn't you swear? Because this is God's, and this is God's. And what does that mean for you? It means that you have to understand your place in the world. And if you understand your place in the world, then you understand the Sermon on the Mount. So I think that the reason he's inserting these extra ideas here is specifically because it's not only about swearing. The parable here is how he's taking swearing and contextualizing it to the contemporaneous Jew and making them understand that swearing kind of latches onto a much bigger concept.
Amen.
Okay, so let's get the last two lines, 36 and 37. So I think this is cute. This is also like, I don't have a deeper thing here, but I think 36 is cute. Don't swear by your head. We see swearing by your head was real. We brought examples that even Elijah the prophet in a story, he swears by heads. It means to add the whole phrase, don't swear by the life of your head. It doesn't just mean by your head. But then the reason it doesn't say by life of your head probably is because it's making a cute idea then, for you cannot make one hair white or black. So number one, they did have hair dyeing back then. Don't think they didn't. But what he's saying again is that this is kind of in the theme of the whole swears. You are somewhat powerless to predict the future, to fulfill your oath, to have any control in the world. And even the smallest thing in the world, generally a hair, which is so numerous, is a lot of times used as like, the sands of the sands of the desert, the stars in heaven, your hairs on your head. It's something that's innumerable. It's something that you can't count. It's something that you think that you have complete control over because it's worthless. Even the smallest thing you cannot control in any way. Okay, and the last line, let your word be yes, yes, no, no. Anything more than that comes from the evil one. So number one, the yes, yes, no, no, I do think is a legalism. I do think he's saying you can't make the yes, yes, no, no swears. He uses the double diction in order to say, like, if you need to have a conversation and you still need to live, to get by, he allows it. And anything more than that, he's saying it's interesting. The supererogation in this situation is saying, live way past the life that normal people live, even though this does have a rabbinic parallel in Rabbah, where he also says, say yes, yes, no, no. That being said, he goes, anything more than that, always speak when you're talking about what you're going to do, the bare minimum. And otherwise, you're really, even when I don't know if it's a devil or just like regular, or you're falling to sin. Which
So
is
wouldn't you say in a way he's also, again, if I were to speak, if I again, in a way, isn't he saying for advocating for the bare minimum as a very pessimistic view of life? You, by the way, have no authority over what are you doing. You're alive. You can't even move your hair. You can't make one hair black or one hair white. So just to the bare minimum. Is that what he's trying to say, or could that be construed from
no, he's
this?
not saying do the bare minimum. So again, the line right before 37 in 536, he's just saying, he uses another phrase. The first three phrases of 34 were about like the theology of impact the world. And he goes, and if you want to use the other diction, the other language of swear, and swear by the life, your own life, like the one thing you own, like, from almost from like a Cartesian perspective. So you don't own heaven, you don't own earth, you don't own theology, you don't own metaphysics, you own religion. But what's the one thing you own? Your life. So if you want to know, swear by the one thing you own, you should know how meaningless, worthless, futile, otios, and any iota that you think you could accomplish, you can't.
That's my point, right? So because of my point, like you probably said this very eloquently. The point is a person can do absolutely nothing. I mean, isn't that
ironic also? Because don't forget, just to be clear, they did have hair dye, and you could change your hair from black to white then. So he was not trying to deny the fact that you can make small changes. He's just saying that you can't make a meaningful change.
That to me sounds like it sounds very depressing. And he says you can't make meaningful change. I mean, it sounds.
I think there's a life of obsequiousness and surrendering yourself to the fact, like even when you keep going back to the Beatitudes, what you see is that the world is a corrupting agent, and the more naive that you can be, the more that you could obfuscate the reality around you. It's almost like the more powerful you can be. Don't be blinded by the truth of the negativity of reality.
Yeah, okay, Rabbi. So if I can take a step back, go back to your earlier comment where you said, right, you laid out very eloquently where you're powerless, you can't change anything, you can't do anything, you went on, right? So if that is true, why would a person even wake up from bed in the morning and go face a day? If everything in life is beyond one's, there's nothing one can do about it. Why even wake up in the morning and go face one day?
Like this is an uncommon belief among most conservative and or fundamentalist communities. There's very much a belief that every single thing comes from you. There's a very famous line in Jewish tradition that everything is in the hands of God except for fear of heaven. And what that means is like everything's controlled. Every single thing is meant to test you, to help you, to hurt you, to change you, to make you repent, to make you a better person. The only thing that you control is your reaction to that, and try to understand it through your beer goggles of theology. So that's the only
reaction. And the only reaction one can have is to say, actually, from this verse is to say, "Blessed be the name of God," because as he later, I can't swear by heaven or by earth or by Jerusalem.
I'm just saying it's not an uncommon belief. You're making the way you're framing it, you make it sound like it's outlandish, and you or I may not believe it, or you may. I'm not here to speak for you, but the fact is, there's millions and millions of people who believe that everything comes from heaven. Especially a lot of people in the Protestant community will say like the main job is to kind of believe and or surrender. The whole idea of martyrdom, if anything, even comes from that idea that when you martyr yourself, what you're saying is that there's a truth that's greater than my truth. And even if it means the cessation of my existence, that is more important because my job is to surrender. My job is to give up what I have, give it through charity, give it up through sacrifice in order to kind of live this holier lifestyle. So I just don't think it's out of whack and out of sync with what we see regularly. And it doesn't mean you can't make a difference. It just means the difference that you make are part of the grander scheme. And again, I would say this is kind of one of the themes of the Sermon on the Mount, and what we see.
So thank you for that. How would our favorite guy, John the Baptist, who set the framework for Jesus, how would he look at this? That his life is, would he say that he was also living from this perspective, or said, I want people to repent, but knowing that they cannot repent, because it's all heaven bound, it's comes from God. I want them to see something.
we keep noting how this theology seems to be not only one level past Rabbinic Judaism, it seems to be one level past John. It seems that John is the precursor and forebearer in a both physical sense, but also in a theological sense, that he sets the stage for this, I think, this stage of Christianity that kind of goes past his. It's really hard for us to make definitive statements about their relationship because aside from Josephus and what we have in the New Testament, we have very, very scant information. So it's very hard for us to say definitively. I would say that this seems to be from my perspective, a more developed theology that takes into account the legalisms, what I would call halacha, the law, the idea of how law takes place. And while we keep noting a lot of these ideas, and specifically oaths, a lot of people say like, oh, he didn't really mean this literally. And obviously we see oaths are taken, and we see Paul and makes 2 oaths as well. So, and Paul seems to have read some of this stuff as well. So we see that a lot of this stuff might just be parables, but it seems to be that he's taking a leap from John, who just says the kingdom's upon us, but we don't really see how it's meant to be played out. But we see from Jesus how he intends for it to be played out. And from John, you maybe would see some form of utopian eschatological picture that's cataclysmic, I can't pronounce it, cataclysmic. More so, where I keep noting from Jesus' perspective, I can't tell you if he expected the world to blow up, but it's very clear that he was living a life that had in mind that the world was not blowing up, that his eschatology was more sapiential and less cataclysmic. I can't pronounce it. Cataclysmic, yeah.
Cataclysmic.
Okay, Isaac, on that note.
On that note, it's a good place to stop. Rabbi, thank you for your time. Lots to think about. Thank you. And maybe you can end by saying, blessed be the name of God. My biggest takeaways from this is, and everything one ought to say, blessed be the name of God.
There you go.
Okay, amen. Thank you.